Hello, Janginis. Before we get started, Rich and I want to let you in on some even more exciting updates for our Patreon subscribers.
As you know, Patreon is a site where listeners can pledge a small monthly amount, either $5 or $10, to support the cost of bringing you your favorite podcast. All patrons get early access to new CutOff Jeans episodes before they're released to the public.
But the most exciting new perk is that all of our patrons will be able to listen to an exclusive bonus episode of the podcast every other week. Topics include personal stories that I'm not ready to share publicly, conversations with family and friends.
And sometimes we'll devote an entire episode to other subjects we love, like musical theater or classic television.
Rich and I enjoy bringing you the CutOff Jeans podcast, and it would mean so much if you would consider supporting our labor of love.
Just go to patreon.com/cutoffjeanspodcast.
Thank you so much, my Janginis.
And now, on with the show. Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip, hip, hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Jeans.
Welcome to CutOff Jeans, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and producer of this podcast. Happy December, Julie.
It's December.
I think the last podcast we did was just before the beginning of December, but now we are deep in the thick of it.
We're in the thick of it.
Yeah.
It's the season. Tis the season.
Although, you know what? I went to the mall the other day, which I don't usually do around Christmas, and it wasn't bad. Like, it wasn't like I remember. I think so many people do the online shopping, as do I.
Malls are nowhere near what they used to be. They're ghost towns most of the time.
Yes.
Throughout the year.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I had a good time. I like kind of browsing through stuff. I didn't buy that much, but
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, the mall's always a good time.
Yeah. So what's going on in DNA news, Julie?
All right. So just in the interest of completionism, I wanted to, because, you know, we did the round heads and the fat face, but we didn't know why the fat face is called fat face. So, of course, I had to come up with I had to research and find out,
of course,
why the aforementioned chain women's clothing store in England was called Fat Face. So I went to the website, and there is a section that says what their history is. And it says, back in 1988, our founders, Tim and Jules, her name is Jules, were enjoying life on the slopes, but money was running out. So they hatched a plan, print some sweatshirts and t-shirts, sell them at night, and ski during the day. Inspired by the name of the Black Mountain ski run in Val de la Cire, La Face, Laface.
Oh.
Fat Face was born.
Oh.
Wah, wah.
That's like disappointing.
I know. It's I would, yeah.
I was hoping it meant, like, you know, after some, like, a facelift surgery and you're swollen and somebody said fat face, and they
they're a fat face,
and they embraced it.
Yeah. That'd be a much more fun story instead of being skiing and the whatever.
I know.
Anyway, so that, and we shall never talk about it again. Okay. I found this from the Manchester Evening News the other day, and I thought it was interesting. A man who was adopted at birth has discovered his wife and mother of his 2 children is his sister after a shock DNA test.
Oh, dear.
His sister. A man who was part of a closed adoption, so does not have access to records about his biological parents, made the discovery after submitting testing to see if he was a suitable donor to donate a kidney to his wife. But it instead found a DNA match so high it indicated that they are actually siblings.
Ugh.
The man said, "My wife got sick just after our son was born and now is in need of a kidney transplant. We checked with her relatives and none were a match or a viable donor. I knew it would be a long shot, so I decided to get a test to see if I could donate. I got a call the other day saying that I was a match." The doctor then said something about wanting to do additional testing due to some information from the HLA, human leukocyte antigen tissue test results. I didn't think much of it and agreed. He added, I was shocked and confused. He explained that because of how DNA information is passed down through generations, a parent to a child could have at least 50% match and siblings could have 100% match. It was rare to have a high match as husband and wife. I asked, what does that mean?
Oh, dear.
The man met his sister 8 years ago with the two exchanging phone numbers, and the man even transferred offices to be closer to her. He said, we're related. No, I'm not kidding. I don't know what to do moving forward, but I know it may be wrong. She is my wife and the mother of our kids.
Oh, dear. The good news is she found a kidney.
That's true. That's literally keeping it in the family, right?
Let's look out on the bright side. At least she's going to save her life with a kidney.
Yeah. Yeah. The story was originally shared on the website Reddit, which with users sharing their thoughts on the case. One said, I mean, at this point, you're married with children already. You can't take that back. So I don't see much point in blowing worlds up, I guess.
Yeah, but it's so ugly,
it's icky.
Right?
And such a good reason, a plausible reason that there shouldn't be secrecy in adoption.
Well, you told me that it's one of the fears as an adoptee is that you will end up falling in love with a family member that you don't know is a family member.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a concern.
Yeah.
It's a genuine concern.
Here is that fear come to life, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah. And I'm sure it happens more often than is actually reported because who wants to tell everybody about that?
Oh my God.
You know?
Oh boy. Well, I hope she enjoys that kidney because it was hard won. Talk about a loaded gift.
Oh my gosh. All right. So, I have my, what's it called?
I have no idea.
Where I can watch TV shows from Australia.
A Roku?
Thank you. A VPN. I have a VPN. Okay. So I use my VPN to watch stuff on Australian TV because it's fun. And I found something. Actually, I read an article first and then I went and found the actual TV show. It was called Hidden Children on a magazine show called Compass that is in Australia. And this one was of particular interest. And there's going to be a theme today regarding, because our guest, she was adopted from Catholic Charities. And this is about the Catholic Church.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And this is an Australian story, but I'm sure it's not the only place that it happens or has happened. So there is a church covered in red dust in Radium Hill, South Australia. It was built by Father Vincent Shiel with his own hands in 1956. 6 years later, his son, Brendan Watkins, was born in Melbourne. Brendan was one of the lucky ones. Both he and his brother Damien were adopted. Damien, what an appropriate name for a son of a Catholic. Were adopted by Roy and Bet Watkins in Richmond, Victoria. As Damien, who was adopted 2 years before Brendan, recalls, one day a clergyman was talking to Roy, their dad, and said, how come you don't have children yet? Rude question, by the way. And Roy said, well, we haven't been blessed. And he said, maybe that's something we can help you with. Yeah, Brendan and Damien had an idyllic life with Roy and Bet. They were told that they were adopted when they were young, but it was Brendan who was most curious about finding his biological parents. In 1984, new laws were passed to allow all adopted people to have access to their original birth records, including recorded names of their parents. That was the Adoption Act of 1984, in which I got my records when I visited Australia in 1986. A psychic told me about it. In a roundabout sort of way. In 1990, at the age of 29, Brendan decided to apply for his original birth certificate because it would carry the names of his biological parents. A meeting was set up with the Catholic Family Welfare Bureau in Melbourne, but it wasn't what he expected. I was hoping that the birth certificate would have both parents' names, says Brendan. It just had my mother's. And she wasn't 16, 17, or 18, as he expected, but 27.
Yeah.
and from South Australia. Brendan asked the social worker to contact her, but she was reluctant. He was later called back for another meeting. I was told that I wouldn't meet my mother. I wouldn't talk to her, he says, and very directly told to go home and forget about her forever. It was the most wounding, impactful trauma of my life. That is what we call second rejection.
Yeah.
People.
It's always, a possibility, isn't it?
Always. Brendan has since discovered that globally there are thousands of children of priests, just like him, who as adults found their biological parents through DNA testing and social media groups. There are 450,000 Catholic priests around the world, and though there are no accurate records, it is estimated that they have fathered over 20,000 children. Crucially, a 25-year study of 1,500 Catholic priests found less than half the priests in the United States attempt celibacy, which experts say is a major factor fueling so-called reproductive abuse. The study's author, ex-priest Richard Sipe, argued it creates a culture of secrecy that tolerates and even protects pedophiles, though he estimated that 4 times as many priests involve themselves sexually with women instead of children.
Yeah.
Brendan's partner, Kate, did her own research on Brendan's mother and eventually found one of her relatives. I recall being at work and Kate rang and said, "Are you sitting down? I found your mother. She's a nun."
Oh, my gosh.
He says, "I pictured my mother in a nun's habit in a convent walking silently through churches. It gave me some peace."
Really? All right.
Yeah. But he still had many questions, no kidding, and was determined to find answers. He eventually made contact with his mother, Maggie, not her real name, through letters and a short visit. But who was his biological father? What followed was essentially 30 years of different stories. Sounds familiar, Brendan says. "My father was dead, or she didn't know what happened to my father." Maggie eventually gave Brendan a name, and it turned out to be false. I wrote back to my mother, and I told her that. And she wrote back and said, "Well, I was dumped, and so were you." And she was right. The chase was over. 5 years later, in 2015, Brendan sent a DNA sample to Ancestry.com. 4 men came back as a possible candidate for his father. Obviously, they were brothers. One was ruled out. He was a Catholic priest, so it couldn't be a Catholic priest, could it? But Brendan's mother, Maggie, then confirmed he was indeed the son of Father Vincent Shiel, who died in 1993 at the age of 90. He was still alive when Brendan first contacted Maggie.
And was Maggie the nun? So a priest and a nun. Wow.
Yeah. But the priest had sworn his mother to secrecy. Brendan says this was a form of spiritual abuse. I love how he committed crimes of his own, but swore her to secrecy. Yeah. It says so much about the misogyny of the Catholic Church, the institution. He says, "It's a male-centric institution that doesn't recognize the rights of women. I found that my mother had met my father when she was 14 or 15, and he was 30 years older, so he had an enormous influence over her." Now he had his father's real name. Brendan applied to MacKillop Family Services in Melbourne for his file. The archivist couldn't find any records and told Brendan this was very unusual. Brendan had to appeal to the Victorian Department of Justice to receive his file. The more children of priests I met and spoke with, I found all sorts of anecdotal stories about destroyed records and people knowing the systems within the church for hiding the children of priests and documents going astray, says Brendan, who was unable to track down his birth records and baptism certificate. Charlotte Smith, the chief executive of Vanish, an advocacy agency for adopted persons in Victoria, says it's an ongoing theme. Records have been known to fall off the back of a truck or be destroyed in fires. Don't I know that? She says, "I think it's really important to investigate what happened. We have quite a few adoptees over the years who have found no paper trail." Brendan has spent the last few years writing a book about his adoption journey, Tell No One, published this past August. He's made several trips to remote South Australia to find out more about his priest father and the diocese he oversaw. From 1943 to 1977, Father Vincent Shiel lived and worked across a vast area of remote inland towns and coastal cities. But Brendan's birth wasn't the only secret Father Vincent Shiel kept. In 1950, Father Shiel received a call from a doctor from Whyalla Hospital on the Eyre Peninsula, or Ayr. A baby had been born 10 days earlier to a 16-year-old girl who fell pregnant to a farm worker. The problem was the baby had been left languishing in the ward. The baby is now 72 years old and lives in Perth. Father Vincent Shiel organized for a young woman to take the baby to Sydney to be brought up by his brother, William Shield. Terry grew up the youngest of 10 children. That's who the baby was. His siblings later told him Father Shield had sworn him to secrecy. Oh, Father Shield. Terry always felt lucky to have such a loving family, and William's last words to him were, "Just remember, you are my son, and you always will be." Terry only found out he was adopted in his 30s. When he applied for his birth certificate, it showed he wasn't officially adopted until he was 2 years old. He confronted the priest who was living in the Blue Mountains and asked for the name of his biological mother. I said to him, "I found out I was adopted. Can you help me out? And I'm trying to track down my birth mother." And he sort of shook his head and said, "They're probably all dead." But Terry's biological mother wasn't dead. He eventually met her before she died 4 years ago. Father Shield had told him a lie. I think it's something that should have been brought out in the open long time ago. He says everybody has a right to know where they come from, what their background is.
You couldn't have a better name than Father Shield for someone who keeps all these secrets.
I know. There is no D at the end of it.
Okay.
I get your point. Yeah. Greens Senator David Shoebridge says Terry's case raises concerning questions. These are extraordinary facts that seem to show a national undocumented trade in babies being run by the Catholic Church. But from a systemic level, it raises just so many troubling questions about what happened and where the documents now lie. There's never been a global scholarly study of the numbers of children of priests and nuns, but in 2022, Doris Riesinger, a senior academic at the Goethe University in Frankfurt and a former nun, published a landmark report on the issue in the United States. We are definitely talking hundreds of thousands of children affected by reproductive abuse, she says, who has examined thousands of pages of survivor accounts, court documents, and newspaper articles. I found the first abortion case involving a 13-year-old girl, and I found cases with girls even younger than that, 11-year-olds who had become pregnant as a result of sexual abuse by a priest. So let's look at that. So they are forced to have sex with their Catholic priest, and then the Catholic priest, who doesn't believe in abortion, forces them to have an abortion.
You know, I wish I could say this is shocking, but it's not all that shocking. I mean, well, several reasons. I mean, when you look at the whole abuse scandal in the Catholic Church that has been uncovered over the years.
Ongoing.
It only gets worse, right? What were they thinking when they tell people you can't have sex? And I mean, I know this is a religious thing and I don't want to step on anybody's religion, but it is like telling somebody that you cannot eat, you know, like it is a human need, you know, and so when you...
Yeah, and they're trying to pretend the priests aren't human, it's insane. In many cases, Riesinger said mothers were put under pressure by priests to have abortions or were coerced into hiding where they'd give birth under terrible circumstances. I actually think we can assume that this is still going on. Of course we can, because none of the contributing factors has been erased. None of them. Nothing has been done. The clerical power of priests' mandatory celibacy that often works as a perfect excuse and cover for reproductive abuse, of course, all of that is still fully in place, and no major research has looked into reproductive abuse. So there's still lots to be done.
I find it interesting when you mentioned that he was the child of a nun, because you figure that would be very hard to hide, where a nun lives communally. And how does that happen where she can go back and become a nun?
Well, nuns don't have to be virgins.
No, but they can't be pregnant. I mean, yeah.
Right. Actually, I have a friend whose biological mother became a nun.
Right. I mean, because it was her choice after she had already had a child, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But I mean, she wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't be allowed within the church for her to get pregnant after she became a nun.
No. Well, you know, with a nun's habit, it'd be easy to hide.
Would it?
You know?
I mean...
Well, yeah. I mean, they're basically moons.
Well, I remember Agnes of God. Remember that play in the movie? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's about a pregnant nun.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's different styles of habits. I myself enjoy a wimple. Because it covers your double chin. Anyway.
His father was a father and his mother was a mother.
Yes. or
a sister. Yeah, maybe not a mother superior, maybe a mother inferior. Poor thing. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm looking at it like as if she was a victim, and I don't know whether it was a consensual.
Yes, she was a victim. Of course, she was. He just like anybody who is abused by their superior. Yeah. He was clearly her boss. Yeah. Okay, listen to this one. Linda Kelly Lawless is another child of a priest who is seeking official recognition of her ancestry from the Catholic Church through Melbourne Archbishop Peter Comensoli. Linda's father, Father Joseph Kelly, said mass for pregnant unwed mothers who came to St. Joseph's receiving home in Carlton to have their babies and adopt them out. Linda says he was having an affair with her mother at the same time. She was not at the home. Only a few months later, he was actually using the adoption system to get rid of me, which happened the following year, she says. And when I was born, my paperwork was never finished and seemed to vanish from this hospital. All my paperwork has baby for adoption, false names. I can't find my baptism record. Over the last 5 years, Linda has met with Archbishop Comensoli and presented him with many documents, including DNA reports and affidavits from family members. But Archbishop Comensoli said while he personally believed that she was the daughter of Father Joseph Kelly, any formal recognition would need to come from the state, not the church. Linda engaged the U.S. company Parabon, we all know Parabon, which is used by the FBI and Queensland Police Service in criminal and missing persons cases. I had legal DNA testing with Parabon in America, and a cousin from my grandfather's side and a cousin from my grandmother's side set forward. She says the results came back that I was 99% related to both of them. It's called triangulation. Linda presented the results to Archbishop Comensoli. In April this year, she received a letter in response in which he suggested an exhumation of Father Joseph Kelly's body, which would be necessary in order for the Catholic Church to officially recognize Kelly as her father. He wrote, "In saying this, I must be very clear that I cannot state categorically that he is your biological father. There is simply not the level of information to do so. You have provided significant evidence of a shared heritage, but it directly doesn't lead to a singular person. I guess maybe he had brothers. I again note that although I do not have the authority to request an exhumation of Father Joseph Kelly, if it is to be sought, it would need to come from you. I would be prepared to support such an application for yourself." Or from yourself. Linda says she will consider exhumation if that is what it takes to get official recognition from the Catholic Church. The cemetery where her father is buried has allowed her to take ownership of his plot and put her name on the headstone. I now actually own my father's and grandfather's grave in the private Catholic cemetery, she said. They seem to believe my evidence and DNA was enough to show that he was my father.
Wow.
So even the Catholic cemetery believed her. She says that she's not seeking legal compensation. Most of us never are. I've asked for a letter of recognition that they acknowledge that he's my father. I asked for some support to sort out my birth certificate because it's not finished. I don't have a surname.
Well, I mean, I guess the whole lesson behind all of these stories is that secrets are never good, and that everybody has
they never remain secrets.
Right, and everybody has the right to know where they came from.
Yes.
They may not have the right to be accepted by their birth parents, because that's a very complicated thing. And obviously we've seen it on both sides where birth parents are happy to have a relationship with their natural born children, and also the opposite. But the fact that people are still being born without the knowledge of where they came from it's abhorrent to me.
It is. It's very sad. I'm almost done. Vanish the Peak adoption advocacy group in Victoria is calling for an independent public inquiry into the treatment of the children of priests and their mothers. It's clearly a case that he's the father, and it would appear that since they're not accepting responsibility, then an inquiry is required to push that, says Charlotte Smith. A public inquiry would help shed light on how many children have been fathered by priests, she adds, and provide the victims and survivors with some sort of justice. We need an independent inquiry with a strong political backing and with thorough scholarly experience. We cannot leave these people who were literally stolen at birth by the church to do this fight alone. This is a matter that I think needs to be closely considered by the federal attorney general and by the federal government. The fact that it was happening all over the country and the fact that these children were moving across borders. Brendan Watkins wants an inquiry to also look at the church's treatment of the mothers. In truth, there's probably thousands of women like my mother who live with enormous shame and guilt, and they suffer.
Well,
so there you go.
On that note, I think we should take a break.
Yes, we shall.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review, or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/CutOff Jeans Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
Okay, it is story time. We're doing it a little earlier today because it's longer. This is Peggy Arvidsson, who is obviously an adoptee. Well, not obviously, but she's an adoptee. And she also has a podcast that we're doing a crossover. So after you listen to this, I believe you can probably tune into her podcast and hear her interviewing me, because her podcast is Adoptees at Work, that talks to adoptees about their career paths and how their adoption, what effect their adoption had on that.
How interesting.
And we got into a really interesting conversation because it's very significant to me, where, you know, my career in life and what it was like as an adoptee to choose that career and it not be supported. So let's listen to Peggy.
Let's do that.
Hi, guys. I have on the line Peggy Arvidsson. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
From the Adoptees at Work podcast. Hi, Peggy.
Hi, Julie. I'm so excited to be here.
I am excited to have you here. We're doing a little crossover extravaganza with our day today. So I'm going to talk to Peggy about her podcast and her experience and her life as an adoptee. And I'm going to talk to Peggy for her podcast about my career. It's going to be interesting. So Peggy, before we talk about the podcast, tell me about your background, your story, your adoption experience.
My adoption experience is, it's funny, you know, this is the National Adoptees Month or whatever.
Adoption Awareness Month. Should be Adoptee Awareness Month for me.
That's what I prefer to call it. Mm-hmm. And I was commiserating with someone else that I have the guilt or that weird almost shame about talking about my adoption because I have a good adoption story, you know? I still get along with my family, my extended family. And that doesn't mean that I also don't have the longing and the what ifs and those moments that I can go down that path. So just to kind of start with that, I had, I was adopted by my parents in Newark, New Jersey when I was an infant. There's not a day that I could tell you is when I found out I was adopted. I always knew I was adopted. My brother was adopted 2 years later from the same organization, Catholic Charities. Thank you very much. And so presumably that would be when we would have talked about it, I guess, you know, in age appropriate terms. Sure. You know, I'm just figuring. And then my sister is the biological child of my mother and my father.
Is she was older or younger?
Younger. So she was the youngest. Yeah, there was me. 2 years later, my brother. 3 years after that, my sister. And
did they adopt because they thought they were infertile?
Yes.
Interesting. Yes. Okay.
Yes. And I think there's a lot of stressed out people in my family. So I think, I've met a lot of people whose parents had similar situations. You know, I know a lot of adoptees. We just sort of locked together. I don't know why I know so many, but I grew up with one across the street from me, my brother, the boys down the street. You know, we were all same race, domestic adoptees. So it wasn't an unusual conversation to have. You know, as I've grown up and been more active, I have found out even more people that I grew up with that I wasn't necessarily close to are also adoptees. So there's a lot of us.
Oh, so many. More than people realize. Yeah.
We're everywhere.
Yep.
We are everywhere.
We're everywhere, and we're everywhere in the media where a plot point in, I'll say at some point, almost every entertainment device, or I should say storytelling device, Yeah, it's everywhere. And it wasn't until I was a full-grown adult, or even probably out of the fog, that I realized that all of this just went over my head for the longest time. That You know what I mean?
Yeah, the exact same thing. And, grew up in a very normal middle-class family. Dad went to work. Mom stayed home with us. She had been an RN prior to having the kids. An interesting little side note that I never really talk about, but it just occurred to me, is my younger sister as a child was a model. She kind of got into it because I had tons of friends, my brother had tons of friends, and there really weren't kids her age in the neighborhood. So my parents took her to this little acting school, and she just ended up getting an agent and getting booked. And we lived close to New York, so so for a good portion of my, my angsty, angry teenage years, my mother was driving my younger sister to New York all the time, which was both great and awful because I felt like my mom was abandoning me, which she really wasn't.
Right.
And I didn't want to be home with my parents because I was a teenager.
Yeah.
So, always knew, didn't really, I can't, people always ask, well, do they treat you differently? And no, no. We all got the same, age appropriate toys. I'm sure that my parents, I know my dad, the way he was, I'm sure he had a budget that was like, this is what we spend on each of them for Christmas, birthdays, whatever,
Yeah.
So none of that. But I always wanted to find my biological mother. I really was very focused on finding my biological mother. And
isn't it weird how you don't even think about the father at first?
I have no.
It took me I didn't find my father until more than 25 years after I found my mother, and didn't even start looking for him until after I had my daughter. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah, I wouldn't have even started looking for him, through the way that everything unfolded was that my biological mother was dead by the time I finally, it was 36, maybe 40 years that I'd been searching, right? Because, I would watch Phil Donahue and write down the notes on how to fill out all the forms and send my self-addressed stamped envelope to get in these lists, which is, by the way, how my brother's half-sister found him.
Oh, wow.
Because I was in, they told you, fill out everything about your family. And I said, I'm a great medium. So she wrote me, and I said, well, it's his story. I don't know if you are or you are not, but I'll forward your email. And, they were in reunion much sooner and I thought, why does I had my name, the internet comes out and I have my name everywhere.
Yeah.
My picture everywhere. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking for sure these people are somebody's looking for me. They must be.
Yeah.
Nobody was looking for me. FTDNA, then 23andMe. And then many years later, my husband convinced me, just do the damn ancestry test.
That's the first one that I always tell people to go to, just because of the sheer size of the database.
The first two, I think I had a friend that bought me the kit because she does some sort of government work related to rare diseases. Sure. So they were on the forefront of these different tests, and so she convinced me to do it. Okay. But they're only as good as the people that are there, right?
Yes, but a lot of people don't. With genetic genealogy, you can, I've found people based on third cousins.
Well, see, now this is another thing that we need to talk about.
Yes. So yes, if you don't know what you're doing, absolutely. If the people, the people you're looking for directly didn't test, it's very confusing. But that's when you need to find somebody who knows how to do it. Yeah.
And I didn't even know there were people that knew how to, all of this stuff was just, I would, it's funny because I have books, we'd go on vacation and I would buy the book that was about your family history. You fill in your family tree, which was random that I wanted to do this.
Me too. But I was the same way. I was like, this is such a cool hobby, but it really doesn't apply to me in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
I didn't, and I would get confused and then I would put it all away, but whatever. Again, had a good family, so I wanted to know about them.
Yeah.
But when I finally did the ancestry test, I got a close hit, right? Boom, boom. And, it was a cousin or whatever. It turns out it was my biological mother's youngest brother. He was 10.
Oh, so it was a half
I was
uncle.
born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was 10 years old when I was born, and she was an adult. So she, he didn't know. And he also, the really interesting piece of this story is that I had been carrying around my file from Catholic Charities for 30 years. And all of these people become two-dimensional, right? They're just their names on a page in the story that Catholic Charities tells you, which, by the way, Catholic Charities, you didn't do anybody any favors. You told me all of my information based on information that you said you got from 2 other sisters, because my file was burned.
Amazing how flammable records are.
Yeah. My biological mother had 2 sisters that also gave up children through Catholic Charities.
Oh, wow.
And so they said they got everything from those files, including the first name of my biological father, which makes no sense at all.
That makes zero sense.
Welcome to Catholic Charities. Lots of sense. So basically he says, I don't think that, I want to help you, but I don't think this can be true unless you're a twin or you're born 2 years later than you say you are. Because my mother had another child that she had relinquished. Wow. And she was born 2 years younger than me, but not through Catholic Charities. So Catholic Charities didn't have that info. So my sister found the family, let's say 18 years prior to me having this connection with my uncle. She didn't know about me. I didn't know about her, obviously. They had accepted her in the family with open arms. My biological mother had died about a month prior to her finding them. So she never met our mother, but she knew all of the siblings and the uncles and our biological mother's husband for 18 years or whatever before I got to know any of them. But so that was it was a warm welcome, warmish welcome. Some of my aunts, particularly the ones who had
also gave up babies,
given up babies, and I had given up their story because
did they feel threatened?
In hindsight, people listening don't spew everything. I wouldn't do that, So that has been a good reunion. But the good news is, and those of you that are listening can't tell this, but I may have a Swedish last name, which was my adoptive dad's, but I don't look Swedish. I don't really particularly look Irish. I know that looks can't tell you everything, but I always knew there was some Mediterranean something in my background. Right. And so the good news is Ancestry told me, in fact, yes, I am essentially,
Italian.
Half Italian.
Okay.
And I also talk with my hands. So, and then the other half was what Catholic Charities had said, Polish and Irish. Kind of a split, which is what my biological mother's background was. So that made sense. So it was easy for me, with no real DNA genetic understanding of all this, to say, I am now hunting somebody
who's Italian
with the first name that was in this file who would also be Italian. So let's see if I have any close matches. Turns out that my biological father's first cousin is an avid genealogist, had 1,700 people on her tree. I knew what I was going after, but I also didn't want to kind of throw everybody under the bus. So I said, I'm looking for someone, probably a cousin or what have you. Could be a I kind of made it a little vague, but I said, and probably with this first name. And she said, oh, that's my cousin.
Boom.
And then I found him, and you may have figured out I'm not a person that spends a lot of time thinking once I've got a hit. So I did a little more digging. I found his phone number and I called him.
Atta girl.
And I left him a message. I mispronounced his last name, those Italian names, even though I grew up in such an Italian community. And then I did a little more research about him and what his career had been. And I thought, if I have his DNA, I know what would get me to call this person back. And so I kind of, I told him the truth, but I sort of brushed up his ego a little bit, saying, hey, I'm doing this research project, and I really feel like, with your background doing X, Y, and Z, you would be the perfect expert for me to talk to about it.
Oh, that's good.
And he called me back.
Yes.
And then I was like, surprise. And, you know, the same thing that I don't want to ruin your life, blah, blah, blah. But I do want to know.
The
and
things that we always say, yeah.
He had been an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was very cautious in his communication style. Mm-hmm. And he asked if my birth mother was alive, if I had met her. Mm-hmm. And I told him she had passed away. And, you know, so he told me all these lovely things about her. You know, she was a lovely girl. And, you know, sort of they met, you know, that summer they had gone to, like, he was at the boys' high school. She was at the girls' high school. They had graduated. He came back after his first year of law school, ran into her at the local pub where she was working. And, you know,
one thing led to another.
One thing led to Peggy.
Just the one.
So, you know, at least one thing did.
Yes.
And, you know, and it was awkward because it's an awkward conversation.
Did he know about you?
No.
Did he say he didn't know about you?
On that first phone call, he told me he did not know about me.
Okay.
He said something like, this is completely unexpected, but not altogether unpleasant.
Okay. That's a nice thing to say.
Yeah. And he's a very, very kind man. I mean, we have a relationship now. His wife is just amazing. You know, I mean, I think
That's
part
great.
of her attitude, you know, I wanted to give him time, you know, to tell her and his kids who were adults. But, you know, I really just sort of said, well, the ball's back in your court. But he was curious and I was curious, and we've built a relationship over the years. I think his wife was sort of like, well, this was long before I came into the picture. And
yes, that is very smart of her.
And she's the oldest of a large clan of siblings herself. So I think she comes from the idea, the more the merrier. It's really delightful to go visit them and spend time with them. I've met their son. I have not met their daughter, but she's sort of in that. She's, you know, they're all younger than me, but she's in that phase where her kids are teenagers and they're all over the place, and she's got a busy job. And, you know, I suspect it would be hard to go from being daddy's oldest girl to having another one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
There's, we have to give people grace to some extent. I have a half sister that's not interested in me at all. And, you know, whatevs.
What can you do? I mean, I'm delightful. Her brother loves me. You know?
Exactly. You're a delight, and that's all that matters.
I'm a delight is what I tell them. You know, and she knows, you know, and I think they wanted to make sure they could tell the grandkids too, and the grandkids were fine with it. And well, it was they use that all the time. Yeah, well, it was the 60s. I was like, or the 70s or the 90s or the 80s. You know,
right, but the 60s is the best excuse because everybody was using
60s.
Quaaludes, apparently.
I suspect that my bio mother, even though I never met her, I feel very clear connection to the way she would have handled it. So when I met him in person with my parents, we went to meet right around this time of year. I came back to the East Coast. I was living out West. And his wife went and talked to my parents, and he said, let's take a little walk. And he said, I wasn't completely truthful when I first talked to you. He said, she did call me and say she thought she was pregnant. I said, well, okay, thanks for telling me. He said, and I told her, but you're not sure, are you? And I said, well, that's spoken like a first-year law student. And he said, and honestly, then I just didn't hear from her. And I said, well, look, I have no, again, talk about giving people grace. It all worked out, in my opinion.
Right.
It's random, but it, you know, and he has said in the past, you know, I don't know that she and I would have made a particularly good couple. I go, I'm feeling pretty secure that you would not. I wanted him to know there was no real regrets other than the fact that I didn't know him and I didn't know her
at all.
And my siblings, particularly on her side of the family, my half siblings, you know, this is a podcast. I keep saying this every time I talk to anybody. Somebody needs to do a podcast that are the siblings that are found. Like, I want to know, because my siblings I'm very close to my sisters, not as close to the brothers, but, you know, we all communicate. Like, I don't want to go hang out with the boys. They're smelly. Right. But, you know, we have good relationships, but my one sister in particular is always saying, I am so disappointed that she didn't tell us because we could have had more years with you and with my other sister.
Absolutely. And that's funny because when I reach out two biological mothers who are resistant, the first thing they usually will cite is that it would upset their children. Yeah. And 100% of the time, I would say, in my experience, the children are like, oh my God, this makes so much more sense. This makes sense now. This explains so many things about her.
Mm-hmm. Huh. That's what my sisters say for sure. And I can commiserate with that pain and longing that they have from a different side.
So did you have a specific time where you came out of the fog? Was there or do you feel like you came out of the fog? Do you feel differently about adoption now than you did when you were younger?
I think I feel differently. I don't know that I was ever super in the fog because I started searching like when I was like, I'm so different from my parents that I was raised with. I mean, I'm like, me too. I used to joke, like, I feel like I was dropped off like in a dinosaur egg. And I grew up with these, falcons or something. Falcons. Because it didn't make sense. So my sense is that I took off the rose-colored glasses. Like, I stopped spewing all of the same story because I knew that I didn't feel great all the time. And, I can look back and know some of that was I was a hormonal teenager, right? Like I just didn't like anybody. So I took off those rose-colored glasses and thought, but then, you kind of, and I've spent the rest of my life thinking, well, who am I? What's the point? I ask this question every day, and I have a very, very good friend that we've known each other since we were 2, and she is also adopted, and we talk every Sunday. And she's like, why are you always asking what's the meaning of life? Maybe there is, like, maybe that's not the point. I was like, well, no, it's all part of my journey. It's part of your journey too. But why? What's it for? Why were we even born? Not like, why was I born into this family and had to deal with this? Like, why are we on earth? Like, that's my big question.
Okay.
Why?
Okay.
What's the point?
Yeah.
So everybody would say, well, it's to be a good parent. I'm like, really? Really? That feels weird.
No, not everybody.
So.
No. I think there are far too many people who decide to become parents that had no business doing so.
You're so right.
Yeah, and I have just because of the crowds that I run in, most of my friends are actors. So I have many friends who made a conscious choice to be like, yeah, I don't need to have kids. That's and I so respect that.
Yeah, it was, awkward for a little while. But, I kept marrying the wrong person, too.
Yeah, that'll do it, too.
And I knew in both those cases, my previous husbands, I did not want to co-parent with them. So I knew it doesn't matter. I'm not having a kid with them.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be tied to them forever.
So it sounds to me like you are a little bit hypervigilant, maybe?
Just a little bit.
Poquito. Yeah, so
my husband walks into the house and I scream, I'll be in the bathroom brushing my teeth and he comes in and I scream. He's like, I live here, right? Yeah, but you got to make noise.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is hypervigilance
yes.
too. And that'll happen to me at work. It'll happen anywhere. I
think most adoptees have some level of hypervigilance to where, and some it's just that, like, you scare easily, and others are, for me, I literally, before any scenario, will go through every single possibility of what may happen during it. It's a curse, but also a blessing, just because I have very good analytical skills, I think, because of it. And I see patterns and all that stuff. And you probably
we're very
do
prepared.
Too. Yes.
Yeah.
Nothing is really a surprise because we've seen it all. And, a lot of time when people are like, oh, can you believe that happened? I'm usually like, yes, I can. As a matter of fact.
People are like, what, are you psychic? I'm like, no, I'm
not exactly.
I read the room and I can read people's.
Yes. We have empaths. We're empaths too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
I just can't recognize my own feelings. That's what I was told yesterday. my friend. She's
well,
like,
because you're used
really...
to compartmentalizing.
Yeah.
And
I was like, but I can read your feelings.
Yes.
And that's clearly what's most important to an adoptee is to read your feelings, forget mine.
Right, because we just want you to be comfortable with the decision that you made about me.
So I don't want to get sent back.
Yeah, exactly.
And nobody ever said that. People don't think my parents ever said that.
Yeah, it was never threatened, but it was still in my head, though.
Oh, yeah, me too.
It was definitely like, we'll get to that later for your podcast. Tell me about what made you decide to do this podcast, Adoptees at Work. Yes.
So as a recruiter, you get to learn a lot about people. Mm-hmm. And when you're with a company whose values you really respect, it's a great opportunity to put the right people in the right job and mm-hmm. really change their lives for the better. But at the time, I was in a job where their values were completely out of alignment with mine, the organization, and I had to quit. So I quit.
Yep.
And went on a retreat that I had planned months prior with adoptees, NPEs. And something just clicked. I want to talk to more of the people like me, but I've got a background in marketing as well, because you name it, I've done it as a job.
Sure.
Which makes me a good recruiter. And I knew that I needed a niche, right? I listened to all these podcasts. I love podcasts.
Me too.
I am very oral mm-hmm. in that I hear better. I learn from hearing, not necessarily from writing. And so it just clicked. I'm going to do my career coaching, which is a business that I'd been doing, but I'm going to have my podcast be my labor of love, my passion project.
Yeah.
And so here it is. And I started out, I first went to 2 adoptees that I had met on LinkedIn and kind of pitched the idea, said, this is what I'm thinking about. What do you guys think about? And they both said, holy crap, that's amazing. Do it. And that's really all it takes for me is one person applauding and I'm all in. I'm on stage. If I could sing and dance, trust me, I would have gone that direction,
Sure.
But I can't. There you have it. Adoptees at Work was born. I reached out to a bunch of the adoptees that I knew, primarily from this retreat, but then it just started to, snowball.
Yeah.
That's the word.
If you will. Yeah.
And it's humbling and it's amazing because adoptees, as we've already discussed, are everywhere mm-hmm. and we do everything. But I also using my skills as a recruiter to put the dots together that sometimes they don't see. I have a few people that have said, well, I'll talk to you, but I don't really have anything to say.
Isn't that funny?
Adoption has nothing to do with my job.
Uh-huh. I bet.
And I say, that's okay. Let's just talk.
I love it. And something comes out every time that it's like,
comes out every time.
That's so
it's really sweet.
So it's just, you talk about their career path and then manage to connect the dots. Mm-hmm. I love that.
And as we go into next year, 2024 season, I'm going to dive deeper into identity mm-hmm. because my experience as a recruiter, as someone who lived in the Washington, D.C. area for many, many years, and just has, worked in relatively white collar, blue collar roles, mm-hmm. is that humans want to identify themselves with their job.
Oh, yeah.
And adoptees are often searching for our own identity. So I have very open-ended thoughts about this, but my theory is that what I've already found in 1 year is that there's a number of us that have done this job, this job, this job, this job. Mm-hmm. And then there's the whole other half that just, they knew what they wanted to do. They did it for 40 years.
Yeah.
And I like that, because some of us keep changing our identity mm-hmm. and others say, this is who I am.
Interesting. Yeah. And some of us, even though sometimes, even though we love that first thing and that was who we were, we evolve and try something else. So how many episodes do you have so far, and how can people find it?
I have 24 for the first season, and you can find it right now on Spotify and on Google Podcasts. So that's where you can find it, Spotify, Google Podcasts. It's Zen Career /Adoptees at Work. And I'd love for people to listen. It's so fun, and it's amazing the feedback that I get, and it just reminds me that I'm lucky to do what I do.
Peggy Arvidson. There, I did it. You just have to say it slower because I'm a fast talker. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for commiserating with me, and letting the listeners know a little bit more about your story.
Thank you. This has been a thrill and super fun.
All right. Thank you so much, Peggy. We had a great conversation, and don't forget to go over to her podcast. She told you where you can find it. You can go find that and listen to our conversation. I haven't heard it yet. It was a while ago that we did it. So I'm excited to hear it again myself. I can't remember what I said. I hope I didn't say anything bad.
Until then, I am Richard Castle. You can go to my website, richardcastle.com, and follow along with whatever I'm doing. I think I mentioned this last time, but my live original cast recording to Love Stings, my musical, is now out on all streaming platforms, including Apple Music, YouTube Music, Spotify, Amazon, all that. So you could just search for Love Stings live original cast recording if you want to hear it, or you could follow me on X or on Instagram at Castle Songs.
And I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. You can find everything Julie Dixon Jackson at cutoffjeans.com. I am currently taking a few pro bono cases. So if you are stuck, just know, as most of my listeners, I think I've taught them a lot. And so I may come to the same conclusion as them. I may end up being stuck where they're stuck, and we just don't have enough information yet. But if you have a DNA mystery that you would like to solve and would like me to look at it, reach out to me and follow me on TikTok, Jen Jeannie Jules Jackson. And as always, the truth is in your jeans. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.